We are now in Masechet Shabbat, chapter 21. We still have 3 chapters to go. We'll look at Mishnah Gimel. בית שמאי אומרים מגביהין מן השולחן עצמות וקליפין, ובית הלל אומרים נוטל את הטבלה כולה ומנערה. How do you clear the table on Shabbat? בית שמאי, there's a dispute. בית שמאי, who usually are considered to be more strict, they say you could clear from the table bones and leftovers, shells of fruits or peels. And Bet Hillel say, "Notelet hatavla kula u'mna'ara." You pick up the whole board, because the table that they had was a flat board of wood standing on 2 stands, on 2 pieces of wood. And it says you remove the whole thing, the whole board, and you shake it either inside the house or outside the house. The Talmud switches them around. It says whatever you say here in the name of Beit Shammai goes to Beit Hillel and vice versa, because usually they hold that one is more strict than the other, and that creates a lot of problems for people within the world of halakha today, because some people don't want to move stuff from the table or clear it. And I'm not going to get into all the details of the halakha today, it's another issue. But just one thing to have in mind, we always speak about the context of how people lived back then and how they live today. Back in the day, people would take all the organic food. That was the leftover on the table was always organic. There was no recyclable, landfill, etc. Whatever you had left, you could. It's bones, it's shells, parts of fruits. So they would take it and they would have a pile outside called ashpa, which didn't mean back then garbage, just meant a pile. Basura. No, not basura. Ashpa means pile, a pile of a heap of leftovers in that case, because the word ashpa in Tanakh means either a pile or the ashpat hitzim, where you put the arrows. So they would put it in the ashpa and they would let it. It's a compost. Right, I just meant last Shabbat I was in Berkeley, and that was so confusing just to know when you finish eating where to put. Even in the synagogue, you had like seven garbage cans, recycling, lead-fill, compostable. You know what? Maybe I shouldn't eat. So I don't know. I don't want to commit a crime by putting. It's important. Recycling is important, but we live in a world where there's so much waste that really we throw out, we throw away so many things. In their world, things were very economic. Just like we saw in previous chapters when they speak about broken vessels, utensils that broke on Shabbat or any other day, they always had uses for even pieces of clay. Clay you cannot reconstruct. Glass they would melt and reconstruct. Metal everything would be reusable. When they never throw away something until it completely erodes. And the same thing with food. So what they did with food was one of 2 things: either you put it in the heap outside, or you throw it on the floor. And since the floor is dirt floor, just keep pressing it into the floor and covering it with dirt. That was the way that the society functioned. So from that, people took this halakha and applied it to modern times, and they say that you cannot move leftovers that are on the table, and therefore, if you put a plate on the table which is not very common today. I didn't see it the same way of kolboinik. We used to have in Israel the kolboinik. It's like this general, like all-purpose bowl that everything goes inside, and I think it's going out. I didn't see it because it's not considered polite to have a central plate where everybody puts their bones. So people have, but when they did that, people were careful not to put the stuff directly on the plate, because they said it's called mevater kli me'echeno. Now that if the bones will be on the plate, you cannot pick it up, and then because there's garbage on it, becomes... Birkat Hamazon is a different issue, right? So no, but regardless of Birkat Hamazon, some people clear the table before Birkat Hamazon, some people clear it after Birkat Hamazon. That's a good question. My grandfather, Alav Shalom, even though he was a Kabbalist, and he came from a Kabbalist lineage, and it is mentioned in Kabbalah that you have to leave the food on the table.
My father was insist to leave it.
Right, so it is mentioned in Kabbalistic writings, not everywhere, that you should say the bracha while the food is still on the table. My grandfather said that you have to clear the table and just leave a piece of bread and the salt, because otherwise, he says it's disrespectful to say Birkat Hamazon when the table is messy. Right, the Mashal Tanu, when we say Masha Chanu Eli Bracha, Masha Shatiru Refuah, Masha Otanu Eli Bracha, that what we ate and drank would be good, and what we left will be a blessing, based on the story of Elisha, that the men came and brought 2 loaves of bread, and it was enough for everyone. And it says Vayichlu Vayotiru Kidvar Hashem, that they had enough. So we don't need it to be on the table, but that came from Kabbalistic teachings, and some people do it differently. Some people also leave. I mean, according to some writings in Kabbalah, I think Ben Ish Hai also follows the same way. You also leave all the utensils on the table, except for knives and metal utensils you remove. So each has his own custom. It's just interesting to see how the manners, on the table have changed significantly. And you have also the thing of halacha in the same way. The Talmud, for example, mentions one of the things that you're not supposed to do with bread is don't wipe your hands with the bread, and don't use the bread to tilt your bowl of soup. They would just put it. Nobody does that today. But back then, when you think of what people had on the table, and there were no paper towels or napkins to clean your hands so either they did it with a bowl of water, or some people would wipe it on the bread. And the Gemara says, don't do that, it's disrespectful to the bread. And speaking about wiping hands, not mentioned in this Mishnah, but there's one mentioned halacha, and it's actually in the Tosefta. They said that on Shabbat, if you need to clean your hand, you could do it biznava sus or biznava shu'al or biznava hamor. You clean your hand with the horse's tail, or the donkey's tail, and it means when it's still connected to the donkey. So this is the and think about what we know today. If anyone would dare to clean your right hand with that, yeah. Okay, so in chapter 22, it speaks about havit shenishbera matzilin hemena mezon shalosh seudot. If a barrel broke, you could go and try to recover from that barrel enough food for 3 meals, and you could also tell others. Bo ve'atzilu lachem uvilvat shelo yispog, but make sure not to use something which absorbs, and then you're going to squeeze it out. For example, if it's wine, because then it is as if you're squeezing wine out of fruits. Now, this halakha is interesting for 2 reasons. One, that like I said before, you see the idea of recovering material. If we have a broken bottle of wine, we'll throw everything away. We'll not try to say, okay, maybe something is left at the bottom, I'm going to drink it. We don't want to get into trouble. For them, it was something that you cannot waste. You're going to try to save as much. But the other interesting point here is that we already read in Perek Kol Kitvei, in chapter 16, that if fire broke out on Shabbat, you could save food enough for Shalosh Seudot. And that Mishnah should have been there, where you speak about recovering food and how much you could do it, but it was written separately, and it could be that this whole chapter was written in a different time. So that part of the of when we tried to analyze and see how Mishnayot were written, and there were layers there that we could see that. I'm skipping several Mishnayot here that speak about liquids and coming from the barrel. Actually, Mishnah is also important. Kol sheba bechamin me'arev Shabbat, shorin oto bechamin b'Shabbat. V'chol shelo ba bechamin me'arev Shabbat, medichin oto bechamin b'Shabbat. That the Mishnah says everything that was cooked from before Shabbat, you could soak or put in hot water on Shabbat to warm it again. And if it was not cooked B'erev Shabbat, but is really almost ready to eat, you could wash it with hot water on Shabbat and then eat it. חוץ מן המליח הישן וקוליאס האספנין, שהדחתן זו יגמר מלאכתן. Except for two types of fish. One is kulias haispanin. Hispanin is from the word España, Spain. They were familiar with the term in Latin, España. And a fish which came from Spain, which was very delicate. So just washing it with hot water would make it ready to eat. And that's not surprising because people eat raw fish.
Sushi.
Yeah, sushi. But be careful. There was be careful when you eat sushi. If it's raw,
1.7 liter.
Yeah.
Warm.
Make sure that it's from a place where they keep hygiene and it's high rated because they are
Worms.
Yeah, worms that people could digest and they keep growing inside. It's not recommended. Anyway, they used to wash it with hot water, and also malih hayashan was, like you said, herring, salted fish, but really more fish jerky. You can't eat it with the salt, but you wash it with hot water and you eat it. On that halakha, there was a lot written regarding what can you prepare on Shabbat. And also became a divide between the Ashkenazim and the Sfaradim. In the discussion of the Talmud, they speak about something called kalei bishul. There are things that are easily cooked, and they said those things that are easily cooked you cannot put in hot water on Shabbat. And those are the two examples: kuliasa ispanim, this fish jerky. So that we understand something that is not edible, and you make it edible just by dipping it in hot water. It's like cooking it on Shabbat. Now, but what if it's not kalei bishul? So, if it doesn't cook easily, right? It doesn't cook fast in hot water. So the Ashkenazim went with the idea that
Third cup.
right, kli shlishi, everything. Those two things we know for sure that are easy to cook, and all other things we're not sure. So, in order to avoid problems, we never put anything in water that we're taking directly from the urn, but rather what is called kli sheni, second vessel. So first you pour into a cup, then you pour into another cup. Some even that is not enough, and they will do a third cup, kli shlishi, 1, 2, 3, and then the truth is it doesn't really cool it down. When you do kli shlishi, it's the same temperature. You put a thermometer inside, it's the same temperature. And I'll tell you a story about that in a second. The Sfaradim, on the other hand, said this. The Mishnah mentions those things that are kalei bishul. Those things cook easily. All other things don't cook easily. We are certain, we have no doubt that all other things don't cook easily. And therefore, if you want to pour hot water on them on Shabbat, you're allowed to. And also, there's another concept that has to be added here, which is en bishul har bishul. You cannot cook something that has already been cooked. You can only warm it up. So and that applies according to this debates among the poskim, among the halachic authorities. Some say it's only if the first manner of cooking and the second are the same. Meaning, if you cooked something on like you made soup or you made rice and then you put it back on a plata or on a warm on Shabbat, that's the same type of cooking. But if it was first baked and then put in water, it's bishul harafiyah or afiyah har bishul. So what would be the most common case? Coffee is roasted, so it was baked already. So if you pour hot water on it, even if they're directly from the urn, even according to those who say that you're not allowed to do that, they'll be okay because it's bishul harafiyah. But some say that this cannot be done. Anyway, we might go more into details in the future, but I want to tell you a cute story on that. And that comes from a diary, the memoirs of Lubavitch Hasid, a student in Lubavitch Yeshiva, who tells his stories of the story of their travels and escape between the two world wars and during World War II. And he says that they were moving from town to town in Russia, what's called Temimim. The students of Chabad are called Temimim, the wholesome one, the perfect one. So he says, and they got to one city, and one little town, and it was Friday, they need to go to the mikveh. Because they didn't have the way to take a shower was at the mikveh. And anyway, the Chabad Hasidim tried to go to mikveh every day, so they went to the mikveh on Friday, a bunch of Talmidim with the rabbi. And when they got there, back in the day, you didn't have running water. You had to fill up with a cup from the hot water and pour it on yourself. That was how you take a shower. So one of the students took a cup, filled up the hot water, and poured it on himself. It was too hot. And he started yelling, screaming, it's hot. One of the other students says, why are you yelling? We have a rule in the halakha, kli sheni lo mevashel. He says, seriously, he says, it's second vessel, right? It's already, you took from the original source, you put in a second vessel. Halakha says it doesn't cook, it's colder. So that's funny, like that you're the guy screaming in front of you, instead of taking care of him, you say, halachically you can't scream because it's okay. But the more interesting insight came from their rabbi, who said, when someone else is in trouble, you could tell them, second vessel. Already by the second vessel, you shouldn't be screaming. But if it was you would scream at the third and fourth and fifth. So he took this halakha and provided an insight of how we don't care about other people's suffering and we care so much about ourselves. But also, this puts in question the whole premise of kli sheni. When they say kli sheni lo mevashel, that it doesn't cook. If it's the same temperature, it should be the same halakha. Either you say it's okay or it's not okay. So in that context, one last thing that happened to me I think I told you that in my synagogue in LA, in Kal Yosef, we had next to the synagogue a place with an urn where you could make tea or coffee. So I went in between Shaharit and Kiryat Torah. My throat was sore. I went to make a cup of tea. I made a cup of tea, and I put the tea bag inside and the sugar, and then I poured water on it because that's how I do it. And a young boy was standing next to me. No, I don't do kli sheni. Always like that. That's the halakha. I put the tea bag and I put water on it. A boy was standing next to me, maybe 12, 13 years old, and he tells me, you're not allowed to do that. I said, thank you for telling me. And which school do you go to? He says this. And who's your rabbi? He said, this is my rabbi. He says, I suggest that when you go back to school, you should ask your rabbi if it's okay to tell a rabbi or anyone in such a direct way, you're not allowed to do that. Instead of giving people the benefit of the doubt and thinking maybe he knows what he's doing and is not a sinner. Anyway, Baruch Shabbat.
Did he do that?
I don't know if he did that. I think he was visiting. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.